Hello class, welcome to another pre-recorded lecture. And in this pre-recorded lecture, we'll be talking about confidentiality. What is confidentiality and what do we have to do with confidentiality as chaplains? Why is that important to us? And so I hope that this lecture will be useful to you as you develop as budding chaplains. As we get started, we want to be able to find out what confidentiality is. What is confidentiality? When you think about confidentiality, what comes to mind? And so in this lecture, I'll be going over a few definitions of confidentiality. The first definition of confidentiality is by, Carey and colleagues, and they define confidentiality as confidentiality is present when one person discloses information to another, whether through words or other means, and the person to whom the information is disclosed pledges, implicit or explicitly, not to divulge that information to a third party without the confider's permission. So I don't know if you see some key things here. So confidentiality is present. We have a confidential situation here when a person discloses information to another, and that information can be whether through words or other means. It could be, a picture or something like that, or it could be, programming or something as well. And that person who has received that disclosed information pledges implicitly or explicitly not to divulge or to disclose that information to a third party without the person who confided in that person's permission, the confider's permission. That's what confidentiality is. Next one is confidentiality involves the ethical duty of the clinician, right here, the chaplain, the worker, the volunteer, not to disclose information about a patient or client without authorization. So again, as chaplains, we have an ethical duty not to disclose confidential information about our patients without authorization. And many of us are not in the situation where we are directly involved in in disclosure situations anyways, but then and so that's the reason why we have an ethical duty to keep patients' information confidential as we provide care to them and also their family members. Next one is confidentiality pertains to the treatment of information, how you treat that information that an individual has disclosed in a relationship of trust. And we know that as chaplains, that many individuals of disclosed information or will disclose information to us, and that doesn't necessarily have to be patients. It could be information about associates, it could be information about administrators. So we have an ethical duty not to disclose that information. So again, let's read the definition. Confidentiality pertains to the treatment of information that an individual has disclosed in a relationship of trust with the expectation that it would not be divulged to others without permission in ways that are inconsistent with the understanding of the original disclosure. So there was an understanding when the information was disclosed, and it's expected that the information should be kept based on those expectations that were in place, that were verbalized, whether implicitly or explicitly, and that information is not disclosed. So confidentiality is how we treat that information. Next, confidentiality and confidential refer to information that is private. So there's a confidentiality in place, or confidentiality is in place when the information is private, personal, intimate, secret, or even even classified or restricted. So when you hear these words, confidentiality is in place, or confidential is in place. Classified due to a set of rules or a promise that limits discussion and public presentation of specific or identifiable matter. And so again, confidential and confidentiality refer to information that is private, personal, intimate, secret, are even classified or restricted due to a set of rules or a promise that limits discussion and public presentation of specific and identified information. So whenever you see these 6 words, private, personal, intimate, secret, classified, restricted, you have a confidential situation. And that is by, again, Carey and colleagues. Confidentiality and confidential information often involves specific private data, but also involves certain intimate relationships, discussions, communication, events, and personal behaviors that are not only to be withheld from public access, but are desired to be kept secret between the confider and the confidant. Confidentiality is therefore a characteristic both of the relationship itself and the information within that relationship. And so there are some key things in this. So while confidentiality has to do with data, it goes beyond data. It has to do with intimate relationships. For example, it's not ethical, like for example, to disclose, okay, a patient client, a patient provider relationship, because with certain type of providers, then that would kind of disclose what the medical condition might be, or it could be discussions about certain things or communication or events. For example, in the case where a teen goes to a certain type of clinic, just by disclosing the location of the clinic and the provider that teenager might have seen can disclose the type of services that teenager sought, or it doesn't have to be with a teenager, it could be with an adult again. So again, simply put, confidentiality is therefore a characteristic both of the relationship itself and the information within that relationship. So it's not just only the protection of the information that is confidential, but also the relationship. I know as chaplains that probably not, most likely we're not going to be in that situation. And so it's very important, it's very important that we maintain confidentiality, not just only the information. A good case in scenario, say for example, if a celebrity were to be hospitalized at your hospital and you had the opportunity to talk with that celebrity, I want you to know that, just that relationship that you establish with that celebrity would invoke a confidential situation, not just only the information that that celebrity has shared. Confidentiality refers to a condition in which the researcher knows the identity of a research subject, but takes steps to protect that identity from being discovered by others. So this is, confidentiality we talked about of patients. Then now we are talking about confidentiality of research subjects, and so again our research participants. And so we have a right to protect the information of research subjects. And for if you're going to be involved in research, and especially in the case of qualitative research, it's very important that we do that. But also some quantitative research, we also need to make sure that we are protecting the confidential information of research subjects, whether qualitative or quantitative. It's very important that we do that. So again, confidentiality is about identifiable data, is about information data. but also, as we can see, it's also about relationship. And so confidentiality is an extension of privacy, where privacy, which we will discuss in our next pre-recorded lecture, is about, people. Confidentiality is an agreement about maintenance and who has access to identifiable data. And there's some information that are identifiable data, such as social security number, date of birth, such as your medical record number, such as your address, your credit card number, and many other things that are identified there. But there are about 18 different identifiers that we need to protect as chaplains. So let's talk about laws covering confidentiality here in the United States as we practice. So some of the laws covering confidentiality are the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which we know to be HIPAA. So HIPAA protects patients from inappropriate disclosures of their protected health information, or what we call PHI. So again, HIPAA, that act that came out, I think, in 1996, protects patients from inappropriate disclosures of their protected health information. People who work in healthcare facilities, schools, and private practice of legal and ethical responsibility to safeguard confidentiality. And you will see why. For example, also we have the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which we call FERPA. And so again, that protects the disclosure of information as it relates to your educational pursuit. So a university does not have the right to disclose your information to anyone that university wishes. And so again, your information is protected by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which we call FERPA. Also, to protect information, you have federal statutes governing the treatment of human subjects in medical and other forms of scientific research. So again, research participants, human subjects, are protected in research. Also, individual state laws that we have that protect, confidentiality. And so it's very important that we know those state laws. And so again, people who work in healthcare facility, because we have HIPAA that governs those facilities, those in schools, we have FERPA that governs those schools, those who are in private, practice. So for example, like doctors and, social workers are, or marriage and family therapists like myself, licensed marriage and family therapist, psychologists, and so forth. They have a right to protect the private information of individuals. And they have also an ethical responsibility to safeguard that information as well. So let's talk about the 5 C's of confidentiality. There are 5 C's of confidentiality. And, just for, clarification, that some of these 5 C's it may not be specifically applicable to us as chaplains, but it's very important that we know these 5 C's so that we know how to, relate and to interact in the space. So the 5 C's, the first one is consent, which is the terms and conditions of disclosure. Before you disclose any information, or before a provider can disclose any information, it's very important that provider has consent. A clinician or provider may release confidential information with the consent of the patient or client, or a legally authorized surrogate decision maker, such as a parent, guardian, or other surrogate designated by an advanced medical directive. So again, the golden rule is, as it relates to confidentiality, make sure that you have consent to disclose or to release the information. And even when there is consent, there are some terms that you need to follow as well. Also, the next C is court order. a clinician or provider may release confidential information upon the receipt of an order by a court of competent jurisdiction. Note, unless issued by a judge, a subpoena should not be considered the equivalent of a court order in many jurisdictions. So again, if there is a lawyer subpoena, you want to make sure, because lawyers are, they tend to try to intimidate, because that's their game to win. And so you want to make sure that you have a court ordered consent. And as again, this will not necessarily apply to us as chaplains. These are more for providers and clinicians that work with patients, direct patient care providers. Next one is continued treatment, or what we call referral, so that the person can get a continued treatment. A clinician or provider may release confidential information necessary for the continued treatment of a patient. This exception is also recognized by HIPAA, subject to the minimum necessary rule of limited disclosure. So when you're making a referral, you should only disclose the minimum information needed, to make an effective referral. Next one is comply with the law. So again, disclosure should be, so you disclose information to comply with the law. A clinician or provider may reveal confidential information in order to comply with the mandatory reporting statutes. And in many cases, many states, clergy are a part of those individuals who are mandated to report these things, such as child abuse, or in some cases, it could be the abuse of an elderly person, or it could be the abuse of a person with a disability, and specifically maybe intellectual disability or so forth. So again, clinician provider may reveal confidential information in order to comply with mandatory reporting statutes, law enforcement or administrative agency investigations, business operations, and other such lawful purposes. So in some cases, some clinicians may disclose information because of probably unpaid, medical bills, or it could be unpaid fees related to providing, therapy or something like that. And so, they may disclose information to a third party collecting agency to be able to do that. But again, as chaplains, we're not required to do that. But it's very important that we know the 5 C's of confidentiality to be able to work through that for us, and so that we can be very knowledgeable as we're in the space. Next one is communicate a threat. So information may be disclosed, to communicate a threat. This is the well-known TerraSoft exception to confidentiality that involves the clinicians or providers' duty to protect others from violence by a patient. The TerraSoft exception exists in a variety of forms in many jurisdictions. And a case in point, it's important normally with the TerraSoft disclosure. Again, as chaplains, probably we will not be called to do this, but it's for us to know that normally there must be a specifically identified person, or a specific person that is identified by the patient or the client that is in danger. It cannot be just random, disclosure. Let's talk about steps to protect confidentiality. What are the steps that we can take to protect confidentiality? The first step to protect confidentiality is never share your password to computer system and other systems with others, because when you do that, you put the confidentiality at risk. You actually weaken the protection that is in the system. And so again, Your password is your private password, and it should not be shared with anybody, no third party. Next one, clear your desk of any confidential information before going home at the end of the day. That's a good practice. If there are, if you have confidential information on a desk, a good practice is to clear it before you leave for home. And the general rule is lock your office door when you step out. And so if you're not in your office, you want to make sure you lock your office door, because just to protect the confidential information of patients, because you don't know who might be watching you or who might open your office door after you step out. Next one, store confidential information in a locked filing cabinet. The general rule is, as it relates to HIPAA, is generally under 3 locks. So it should be in a locked filing cabinet, a locked room, in a locked building. So it's normally 3 levels of protection, or it could be a locked computer in a locked room, in a locked building. So again, 3 levels of protection: a locked room, a locked filing cabinet rather, or a locked computer in a locked room in a locked building. Those are the 3 levels of protection. Next, also refrain from leaving confidential information visible on your computer monitor when you leave your workstation. So you want to make sure that you put your workstation to sleep where confidential information is not showing. And so put your computers to sleep. Also, place a confidential mark on all confidential information, whether those be physical documents or electronic documents. You want to make sure that you put a confidentiality notice on that. Next, dispose of confidential information properly. Follow your company's policies. And so for example, this might be where you place the confidential information in the shredded bin. That's one of the best practices as it relates to confidentiality, to place confidential information in the shredded bin, which is locked. And so you can't really get back the information or get that confidential information out unless you have access or a key to open that bin. Refrain from discussing confidential information in public places, because you don't know who might be listening. And so again, you want to make sure that you're not discussing confidential information in public places. Also, use encryption to transfer our email, confidential or sensitive information over the internet. Encryption is going to be key with the transfer of information or emailing of information over the internet, because encryption encrypt the information. So if the information were to be intercepted, the information would be protected, because if it's intercepted, all they will see is just some binary numbers, and they cannot make sense. Next one, limit access of confidential client information. So with this, in limiting access, you establish what is called a need to know. A need to know. So in other words, the person who only has access if that person has a need to know this information to do his or her job. Again, limit access of confidential information. Next is only access information you need to do your work. That is very important. So for example, if you have a celebrity client that is in the hospital, but that client is not on your unit, I want you to know that you have no right to access that client file to find out what's going on. So you only access information you need to do your work. That's a best practice as it relates to confidentiality. And again, in terms of unauthorized access is also monitored by most healthcare companies, if not all healthcare companies. Before disposing of an old computer, use software programs to wipe out the data contained on the computer or have the hard drive destroyed. And so again, most times we won't be doing this. IT, individuals from IT who are the expert in, and the know-how to be able to do this, these are the individuals that will take control of this. But it's very important that you know this, for the protection of confidentiality. And so again, it's very important that we protect the confidential information. And don't forget that confidentiality is in place when we're dealing with secret, private, personal, intimate information. And we have a ethical obligation to protect the confidentiality of our patients, their family members, fellow associates, and also the administration, and the confidential information of the company, such as business secrets and so forth. And so I hope that this pre-recorded lecture was a blessing to you, and that it has enhanced your knowledge of confidentiality. And so again, we'll be discussing in our next lecture, privacy and privilege communication.